All right, welcome everybody. My name is Ruben. I'm very excited to be here. It's the 5th year in a row presenting at the Polyglot gathering. I hope you'll find, usually I present about accents and pronunciation and imitate all the accents. Maybe we'll do some imitation today, I hope we can. But I think you'll find it's that we're pushing it a little bit, the envelope of what I can offer and share with the community. We'll get to nothing sentences today. We'll talk a little bit about what that means soon, I promise. I kind of use the talks every year to find like the best information, the best techniques, the most interesting parts of my year as a dialect coach and as an educator. And so I hope you find this is interesting. Every year we kind of coin new terms, nothing sentences, for example. I hope you find this is a simple talk. We'll have 3 parts. The first part we'll talk about the ultimate goal of a language learner, which I think you can all relate to. We'll describe some techniques in particular and what I'm all about and how I can help and why I'm even here talking about this. The second part will define what a nothing sentence is. We'll even give you a formula that you can use, and I hope you can apply this to all of the languages you speak. And finally, we'll give examples, lots of examples definitely from English, Spanish, Portuguese, do Brasil, and Hebrew. So any Israeli fans, Hebrew fans in the audience, we'll see if we can move through these a little bit. So I've enjoyed talking to a lot of people so far, coming to talks and seeing a lot of similar themes. A lot of people want to sound like a native speaker. Not in every language. We have our A and beginning levels where we still feel like there's a lot to learn. But I hope that you can apply some of the principles from today even at a beginner or intermediate level or stage. We share a lot of the same problems, and these mainly deal with habits that we form. So I think the list here you'll see is basically broken into easy habits. So it's really easy to want to feel native, constantly wanting to get there, sound better, use more native-like vocabulary. Instead of hoping and pushing yourself in that regard, my reframe is to really put yourself in the situation of a native speaker. For example, I was talking earlier today with a friend, Tomas, from Argentina, talking about how sometimes you can learn a language so natively, but you might not know how to say tag or la mancha, the game as you play when you touch someone as a child so that they can go touch someone else. Like games or idioms that are just lost because you're learning as an adult are extremely valuable for tying yourself to the culture and to the language. So reframing here and sounding more native is often using references to cultural things or songs or anything that's related to something that someone would know as a child or as a younger person. An easy habit could be thinking of this language as a completely new endeavor. Instead of realizing how much you have to give your new language as a native speaker of your native language, and using this we call cross-linguistic transfer to make connections, not just grammar links, but also with sounds. If you speak Portuguese, you can then nasalize vowels in Polish, I learned. So there's all that kind of transfer where you wouldn't think that they would actually help. Memorizing individual words is an easy habit, but what if you made those flashcards into full sentences and the utterances became longer and more tied? You start to give off an air of nativeness, and we want to do that early on because that's what you're going to do ultimately. Why not skip a few steps? The last part here, just being able to imitate is not a skill that we're really taught or we really practice at all. We comprehend, we get the gist, I want to know what you're saying, and I want to be able to respond, but I'm not really recalling what you said exactly. I don't know if I could repeat word for word, style, all that intonation for whatever you said. I don't know if I could repeat that exactly. I understood what you meant, and now the reframe is to do that thing I mentioned. Could you really pause the video and then repeat exactly what that speaker said? Trying to do that is my goal, an ultimate goal that might help you. Ultimately, we just want to tell the person that we speak the language without actually telling them. And naturally, you do that in the first few seconds. We make these first impressions, I'm sure here, when you find someone, you read their card, you see what languages you have in common, and of course the accent comes through in the first 10 seconds. That doesn't determine your level, of course, but isn't there some kind of perception, right, about like, I mean, I know you speak well, and no, like, respect for this whole group, but I want to be able to show that feeling of, what the heck, how did you do that? Where are you from? What are your roots? What is your family? I want to know more. I'll tell you some more. This is where I talk a little bit about why this matters to me and why it's important. I work every day with these languages in English and Spanish, Portuguese, Italian, and Hebrew as a dialect coach. I help people who are students, language teachers, performers, anybody who wants to sound a little bit more and feel a little bit more like a native speaker. And they do this, people generally, if you're curious, they do this to build confidence, obviously in a foreign language, to connect more deeply with native speakers, with their studies in particular. It's to validate and to feel good about all the time that you've spent, hours and dollars and euros and all the currencies, to get to this point when you start to speak a language, and then they respond in your native language, or ask you where you're from, or you get the whole runaround. I started to do this business, this accent coaching, when I realized that when I speak foreign languages or imitate accents, it sounds pretty good. The people is very happy, they can identify that I'm not a native speaker, or they don't know where I'm from actually at all. But the point is, when someone thinks you're from a place that's not your native land, it's exciting. It's surprising for most of us because we don't actually know how good you sound. You don't often get feedback on your accent. And so when I moved to Argentina for the first time and people were like, y tus papás no son argentinos? And I was like, no, soy puro Yankee. And it was like a very natural exchange, and people would it was like a party trick. You start to speak a certain way, and people are just like, either if they know you're not from there, they are just shocked, and if they don't know, they don't even do anything differently. They don't bat an eye. They don't actually react until they do. It's just kind of fun to see how long that takes. But the whole premise of this is to not only reach that point, but for me, it's to break down techniques and principles and linguistic concepts so that students can actually utilize these techniques and tricks in a pragmatic way. So this is an example of my brain, how it works. Who doesn't love a good flow chart? This is something, I shared something similar to this one last year, but this in particular highlights two areas, as you can see, the prosody and the idiomatic structures. What you're looking at is a flow chart of what I consider a spoken language identity. In other words, whenever you speak or make a mistake, let's say, in a foreign language, it's usually because, if you look on the left side, it's because of a sound that you made that was different, a phoneme that didn't exist in that language, or perhaps you stressed the wrong syllable, hablo versus habló. Maybe you didn't link the words together, you paused unnecessarily. That's all under the prosody and the accent category. But on the right side, you see that the dialect, the word choice, is half the battle. It's half the game. So if you have a solid accent, but you don't have grammar or vocab or these idiomatic structures, you know, it's a cool trick. It lasts a minute or so, and it's fun. You should still do that. But the long term, the longevity of the language learning is in all five: prosody sounds, isolated vocab, idiomatic structures, and grammatical structures. Now, the prosody and idiomatic structures are highlighted because those are the areas where students tend to spend less time, and there's fewer resources and deep resources to actually support. How do you learn intonation or tone? How do you really learn idioms in the same way that you would learn I guess it's more about like determining what's slang, what's a cliche, what's so unoriginal that nobody actually uses, and what's a real idiom or a phrase that you're going to hear every day, and if you don't use it yourself, you're missing out. That's what we're talking about here. You'll see lots of examples coming up. So if you can understand this framework as these 5 categories of your identity, you can also categorize feedback as a coach. You can say, when you pronounce the word it like eat, you didn't make a grammatical mistake. There's nothing wrong with the word choice. You speak English perfectly. It's a sound thing. It's a vowel. You didn't realize that E and I are different sounds. And so we can narrow the focus. The sounds can be expanded. This flowchart goes on. But just to save you some time, you can see the main points. Knowing what rhythm, linking, and tone are separately also helps. To give them names, to give them categories, is an opportunity to really move forward. So in general, the main idea here, the thesis for you guys is to make an incredible first impression in any foreign language, you need to string together series of words and phrases, and choosing which words and which phrases and practicing the pronunciation of those said phrases is going to get you there faster. That's what it's all about. So you can do it from any stage, but if you can see how this prosody, that intonation, linking words together, combines with that idiomatic structure section, you start to feel like, gosh, everybody's speaking in phrases. We just don't say one word. There's no way to stop at one word. It's just not a thing we do. Hearing myself say 4 or 5 word phrases, it's just more natural that way. So let's talk. Let's talk about this nothing sentence. This came about from a lot of observation. Every time I watch a show or listen to a podcast or go through the motions that we all are familiar with, I'm listening for prosody and idiomatic structures. I'm listening for, even in English, my own filler words, the type of things that you might do too much in a presentation, but you want to be aware of a little bit in conversation. I noticed that a lot of people, native speakers, repeat the same phrases. Not just these idioms, and not just the filler, like ums and so forth. Longer sentences. Things like, and it's funny because I was just talking about this same thing yesterday. It's not really saying much here, but it's a common thing to hear. Maybe not exactly word for word, but maybe word for word. And it's funny because I study Japanese too. And it's funny because I wanted to go there last month. And it's funny because whatever, it doesn't even matter. You can say it, and there's something more to this than just the sentence itself. The fact that in English we say it's funny, which I think happens in other languages. It's not really funny, haha. It's like curious, it's interesting, it's a coincidence maybe. But that's idiomatic, right? And if you can do that in Spanish, right? Gracioso, que chistoso. Yeah, it works the same, and that's another thing to find out. Does your language do that thing where you say it's funny, but it's not really funny? Cool, we have the same thing, we have the same principle. I was just talking about this. It's human to remember something you were just talking about. It's a human connection that you can translate into any language. So we'll see how this breaks down, even just the first part, and this type of filler introduction, or this discourse marker, if you will. So nothing sentence is any type of connection, combination of filler words, discourse markers, and idioms, often repeating themselves throughout the phrase, that maybe is a full, complete sentence, maybe is a phrase on its own, but that there's a formula for, if you will. There's a potential thing that I thought was interesting to see if we can kind of put them together. You'll see how this works. The first step is a filler word or a transition phrase. So we have 4 languages here: English, Spanish, Portuguese, and Hebrew. And you guys are familiar with these. So yeah, and like, but and so. I guess it's like, there's tone to it. There's something, and notice I put 2 words here. It's not just it's but And it's not just like, it's in like, I'm like, I mean, I guess it's like, I will say, as I read these words and phrases out loud, I notice like those are the things that you're supposed to not say when you're talking, right? I know that that's a thing. Everyone here is just like, these are phrases you're taught to avoid to be an eloquent presenter or just a formal speaker. And I'm not here to say you need to use these more if you're giving a presentation. I'm saying that everyone's using them regardless. Why not jump in and see what you can do in a foreign language? It makes you sound more native if you can put these together. In Spanish, same idea. Try to find two words here. Así que, pero bueno, y nada, pues sí. It's funny for me to say pues. Argentinians don't say pues. Pues sí, o sea, como que no sé la verdad. You can already see it's getting into phrases. You want to say more words because you're just in the thinking filler zone. Português, pois é, tipo assim. They all mean the same thing here, right? Bom, então, assim. Deixa eu falar. Deixe-me falar. Deixa eu falar. Another talk. Nossa Senhora do Céu. Puxa vida. I think Brazilian Portuguese, you can just speak in interjections and just make an impression in Portuguese. And that's a nothing sentence, it's nothing greetings. In fact, I guess a lot of greetings are nothing sentences. In Hebrew, you have Tov, az beseder. Doing the tone, az beseder. מה שבא לך. כאילו, yani, wala. A lot of these are Arabic, a couple of them are Arabic words, wala. Nachon, yo. לדעתי, in my opinion, like this. You have this tone that goes with it. So you can tell, I mean, I hope you can hear, just going through, so yeah, así que, tipo assim, az beseder. You can hear an accent change from all four of these. So it's not just about the words. You can memorize the words, and you should, but this is just half the half of the equation. You need the idiomatic structures as much as you need the prosody and the pronunciation. So we'll continue with this. The step one is the filler word. Step two is a common idiom, especially that follows that filler sound nicely. You see, the thing is, I'm just not sure if it's, right? We're seeing signs of, you could probably think of so many more of these. Wanted to let you know, how many of these messages do you see every day? And this is a technique. If you guys work with native speakers, you can pick and choose and use templates. I'm sure you have this. It's strategic word choice, but you still have to practice the linking of the whole phrase, which syllable is stressed, etc. Sí, lo que pasa es que no se me ocurre nada. Puede ser que, no, pará, no puede ser. Right? I'm saying a lot, right, with those choices. Pará, using el voceo. Claro, por supuesto, essa aspirada. Na verdade, even if I say verdade or verdade, I'm saying something, right? When I say my words, the pronunciation is going to tell a little bit more where I'm from, where my experience is based. Verdade. Pra mim. Can you nasalize than me? I'm listening for it, right? Pra mim. Na minha modesta opinião. Como você quiser, vamos supor. In Hebrew, האמת the truth is, right? The truth is, בקיצור, מה שבא לך, whatever you want, it's okay with me, can be. אז נו, מה עושים? יופי, כפר על הראש שלך. That's a good one. כל הכבוד, all of these phrases combining. And the third step here is, if you can, kind of exhausting all of the phrases that you know that mean the same thing. It's a suggested technique here, but next time you hear people express themselves, right? They have some bad news, some good news. They usually say it in 3 or 4 phrases instead of 1, because there's different perspectives to it, you know? It's just not going to work. It really isn't. Not today. If ever, but definitely not today. So yeah, it's not the best news. not good at all. Like this stream of thought, I've heard it. I've heard people say this. This is not a quote, but it's something that you could hear over here on a phone call. Why do we do this? Who knows? That's not the point. It's just about how common it is across languages. Para mí es lo mismo. O sea, me da igual. Es que no veo ninguna diferencia y tenemos un poco de prisa. Así que elegí vos. The connection, maybe the speed is too fast. Así que elegí vos, como quiera. No tengo preferencia, la verdad. You're stringing them together as you're pronouncing them, and someone's just like, pring, pring, pring. It's like a pinball machine. Points, 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 brah. Because why? How would you know how to do that? It's insane. You're just a beginner. Where are you from? Where did your parents come from? Where do you live? What's your story? I think that's sometimes a common reaction you should expect if you said this without pausing very much. Para mim, this is more paused. Para mim, eu acho que tá tudo bem, né? Fechado então, combinado, certo, certinho, certinho mesmo. I don't know if you guys are familiar with this accent, but it's awesome, right? Certinho mesmo. Pode ser, beleza, beleza pura, tá? Então tá, é nóis, cara. Tamo junto, até mais. If that's not an average end to a phone call in Brazil, I don't know what it is. That is just, by the way, the ends of phone calls are great nothing sentences, right? Okay, we'll talk soon. All right, tell her I said hi. And it sounds, it's words, it's just things that you can predict. In Hebrew, same idea. Ani lo ma'amin, I don't believe it. Yo, mata omer. What are you saying? Yo, nu, I won't translate in the middle. Yo, nu, זה מטורף. איך זה יכול להיות? אני באמת בשוק. נו, ולא בקטע טוב, סליחה, באמת, לא בקטע טוב, אתה יודע? וואלה, איזה מוזר. And these things that are going on in your head, like, yo, they're just saying the same thing. לא בקטע טוב. Not in the good way. לא בקטע רע. Not in the bad way. So when you see these phrases all together, and you're like, what is this person really saying? Couldn't they just have said the first thing and stop? What if you go back, step one, and take, like, for example, a so yeah. See, the thing is, it's just not going to work. You can build your own nothing sentences here. You know, I'm not sure if it's going to work. It really isn't. Let's go into Spanish. Sí, lo que pasa es que para mí es lo mismo. Go back and forth. Pero bueno, no se me ocurre nada. You can pick and choose. It's kind of like Legos for language. We can just see which works. Again, they're not all interchangeable. You don't want to just make random mixes, but you really do find these forms repeated a lot. Pois é, na verdade, para mim, tá tudo bem. And just building those slowly from one to the next. טוב, אז האמת היא שאני לא מאמין. You can go through the whole thing and just see how that works for yourself. So it's a step-by-step process. There's lots of different ways to go about building them. There's not one way. But these sentences are real. They're saying a lot more than just the actual phrase itself. Let's take an actual real-life example. Because, by the way, a really solid technique for anybody here trying to sound native and trying to implement these nothing sentences is to consider the first questions you're definitely going to be asked. You know people are going to ask you, do you speak English? Do you speak language? You know people are going to ask you about your background, where you're from, what do you do, if that is important to them. Or they're going to say things like, you know, how was your weekend? Something about this small, talky, predictable question. It's just so important to think about, what would I say to that? I know they're going to ask me that question. How do I answer, do I speak Hebrew? Or do I speak this said language? Maybe I don't want to just say yes or no. Maybe I want to give them something more. Because as we were talking about, it's really filled with information when you give them a full sentence, or two, or three. So if you said, hey, if someone asked you, how's your English these days? And you said, I think I'm pretty fluent. I live here, so I use it a lot. I mean, that's not a bad answer. That's better than yes. or no, or these like type of phrases that you might just say describing your level. This person, again, it's not a quote, I just made this up, but this sentence describes something that's kind of idiomatic. I'm pretty fluent, some vocab, I live here, so I use it a lot. Now we add nothing sentences. Question, how's your English these days? It's funny, I haven't actually thought about that for a minute. I mean, I guess I'd say I'm pretty fluent. It's like I live here, so I use it a lot. Why? What would your answer be there? Or what would you say about me? What did we really add? The funny thing we talked about is idiomatic. I haven't actually thought about that for a minute. Slang means a long time. It's one of those things that you just wouldn't say. Maybe it's a generational thing. That's slang for my gen. But I guess I'd say we're just filling things in a natural way. It's like, and this is also important too, it's like, why? Following up with questions, passing it back, asking people questions because you're interested in them. I sometimes forget about that as a language learner. I just want to, I'm worried about my own thing and my conjugations and my pronunciation. But a technique is to pass it back, but eloquently and politely. What do you think about that? What would you say there? Two questions that also mean the same thing, right? Just doing more nothing as we add to it. So we'll look at a couple examples here. We'll kind of wrap up with more nothing and see if we can build some other sentences. By the way, I can share these slides with everybody here if you'd like. They're shared with the speakers as of now. But I would like to somehow compile a list of nothing sentences if anybody is game for trying to create them in your languages. We can share them. We can create a little dictionary of nothing sentences, if anything, just to give some support to any beginners or intermediate speakers who want to practice the pronunciation of some useful daily utterances. So we have here more nothing. Well, I guess that depends on depends on what you mean by. You could really take these for a spin. Man, well, so the beginning starting here with the filler phrase. Well, man, oh really? So my gosh, I totally know what you mean. It's like, come on, right? Right. Totally. And so when you have this humor with it, right? There's a I don't know. These seem in some cases like lines from shows. You probably hear these. A lot of them are catchphrases, right? And that's what sticks. Usually, we watch shows, we memorize lines to movies and music, and it's just what we like. And so we're going to repeat those things. That goes back to the whole training like a native. Learn the songs and watch the shows that natives actually watch. Make the references. I was just about to ask you, that's crazy. Everything's crazy in American English. It's crazy. Everything's awesome and crazy. Yeah, it was just like, what are we even doing? How often do you feel that? Oh my gosh, that reminds me of another thing. This one is, probably the easiest, to use some string of words that would transition to a thought, right? Oh my gosh, that reminds me of, it's okay to change topics, but it's weird if you just change topics. You need to give me some words, or tell me what you're thinking. Oh, I'm so sorry, but I just thought of something. Whatever, maybe culturally you don't do that. But let's look at some other languages. Un poco de nada. Me parece que te vas a encontrar con que. Right, same idea here. Nothing really said. No sé la verdad. Siento que como que. You can just translate these literally. I don't know, I feel like it's like, ¿en serio? Muy loco, porque yo estaba. It's hard for me to not really lean into the RG accent when I go through these, Pero bueno, la verdad es que no hay ningún problema, no hay ninguna, whatever. You can change the words. Y no, es tal cual. Exactamente lo que decís, lo que dices. And again, these are things that you can just feel. You can hear someone saying and being just like, no, and maybe you repeat the same way. You can kind of have a conversation back and forth. Some Portuguese examples. Tipo assim, se você quiser, a gente pode marcar. So if you want, we can schedule right? Something you might do naturally during your weeks. Also, scheduling language. Can you hear me? Can you see me? Zoom language. These are where the nothing sentences live. Predictable and just common occurrences. Entendi. Só que eu queria te perguntar uma coisinha. All right, I understood. I just wanted to ask you something. Uma coisinha. Muito bom. Fechado então. Combinado. Não vejo a hora. You can use these phrases again. Brazilian Portuguese seems to be more wordy in general. So if you find that a language isn't really wordy, maybe this doesn't work for every language. It's just like simple, to the point, tachlis, as we say. Mas, enfim, e aí? A gente pode conversar um pouco mais sobre isso. Sometimes what you find in these sentences is that what's happening that's really impressive is that you're saying these sentences in such a way that's strung together without much emphasis on any of the words. I think I kind of just did that. So the idea is that you can string together sentences, but you're not landing on syllables like this. This is easy to practice, and it's important to exaggerate. But the impressive part of speaking a language is if you can clearly string the words together without really breathing a ton, still pausing for breath, but you can have a chance to show the person, I'm not waiting and thinking and practicing with you, which is tough, and it's not going to happen every time. But with some of these active or overt practice, some practice with these actual sentences at least, you can start to see it flowing together. A couple more Israeli nothingness sentences here. טוב, אז אם אני לא טועה, נראה לי שזה בדיוק. Right, so if I'm not mistaken, right, it seems that it's exactly, right, כאילו מה שבא לך, לא משנה, באמת, אני זורם. I would say this in English too. Yeah, whatever you want, whatever you feel like, it doesn't matter. Honestly, I go with the flow, אני זורם. I love that word, זורם. אז אני מניח שמה שניסיתי לומר, this is something we saw in English, I guess what I was trying to say is, it's such a common way to summarize and just introduce what your final thoughts are. מבחינתי, זה רק עניין של מה שאמרתי קודם. Right? In my opinion, it's really just a matter of what I told you before. What? What are you talking? What does that mean? You're just summarizing things. It's okay to repeat yourself. בטח, אני מסכים איתך. ב100%. אולי זה פשוט שאלה של, right? Of course, I agree with you 100%. This is also a good technique. Yes, and, right? Yes, and what we should do is, right? Maybe it's just a question of something else. And so you see these phrases and these sentences as, I guess, ties, transitions, ability to connect deeper with native speakers because you can actually see what they're saying. You're imitating, but in a flattering way, in a communicative way, in a social way. You're considering things like tone and rhythm and linking words together, which is something that isn't always easy to find, but we can talk more about that if you're curious about learning about accent and modification. But in general, the main takeaway here is that you get to choose. You get to choose the words that you're uttering. You get to choose the style, the accent, the region that's associated with it. You get to understand a little bit more deeply or know what to look for so that you can choose an identity. I don't know if you feel this way, and I'll leave you with these words too, just to think about this. Some people like to learn a language just to communicate. It's beautiful. We should. That's the part. That's what it's for. But the deeper connection, the things that I'm talking about today, that take you to that level where someone says, no, man, come to this barbecue with my friends because I want to invite you. I want to introduce you to these people and show them what you got going on. It's just a wonderful feeling. It's that ability that keeps the conversation in the target language. That's really important. Because if you have the accent, let's say you both speak language at equal levels, you got them on the same B level here, it often comes down to how well you carry yourself, how much you have that whatever idiomatic-ness. Usually it is a pronunciation. And there's kind of a battle, not here, we're fun and equals, we like to share. But when it comes to really, in this relationship, are we speaking Hebrew or English? Right? Spanish or Portuguese? Which one is going to prevail? It often comes down to these little things. How much do you know about La Mancha? How do you say tag in Spanish? How much does that really play a role in what I know about you if we're not practicing and just deciding for ourselves what language we want to practice? So consider the first impression. Consider the first sentences you say. You don't have to say a lot, but you can use these nothing sentences to show a ton about the cultural connection, this prosody, and this idiomaticness that you have all worked so hard to show off. So thank you so much. I definitely want to talk more about accents. You can contact me at any of these places online. I like to share tips and techniques about accents all day, all year. You've been awesome to speak to and to listen to me. Thank you so much. I'll take your questions. So, I'm coming at it from an American angle here. I of course, grew up with small talk, and in a lot of the languages that I study, that's a bonus or an advantage where you can really flow or have this wordiness. I suppose that the word choice doesn't have to be empty, as a lot of these sentences were showing. The thing is, in many cases, they're just transition phrases. They're things that you would say anyway, and they are content-filled. But the ones that just ramble on about filler words are kind of a way to just show off that those little sounds and those little nuances that it's like when you learn a song, like the version of the album version of a song, and like the melismas or like the little vocal decorations that the album arrangement has. You just remember those things because you've imitated it so much. You've heard it over and over. And so for me, those extra filler words are more about that icing on the cake, where someone's like, oh gosh, and you also know that, but the string of words that you put together, if you're learning a language that's a little bit more, let's say to the point, we want to use the same technique, but hey, just use real content-filled sentences. Thank you so much for that. Question, were you exposed to any of these languages as a child, or was all your learning as an adult? I was exposed to Spanish. So I'm from Michigan, from Detroit, Michigan. It's kind of near Canada. And is that how you describe where Michigan is? It's basically the Spanish that you learn as an American student, which is not great. But my mother was a Spanish teacher. She's still with us. She's retired for like 30 years. So she spoke Spanish like an American. She didn't have that native, like she hadn't lived anywhere, but it was definitely around. And my dad was born in Morocco and grew up in Israel. So he spoke Hebrew to his family. Again, a language I didn't learn until I was 25, seriously. And so the accents were there. That's a lot of my talks I've talked about this before, where it's like, I don't learn the language with the greetings first. Well, I do, but I'm like, give me the phonemes. I'm studying the IPA chart. I'm that nerd who's like, index Roman numeral 12 page, where I'm like, okay, so S and Z, interesting. So the exposure was there for sure, but actually speaking and tying this to language wasn't there. It wasn't until I got to college, university, and studied and saw that linguistics was an option to study, figured out what that was, and said, oh, those voices I like to imitate all the time, I can apply that to an actual language, and people are like impressed with it. So the exposure was helpful, but I wish I had it earlier so I could maybe have a few more flags, but no regrets, really. Thank you. Please do your Brazilian accent. Obviously, also it's a serious aid for us learning the language. Okay, tá bom. We're going to speak Brazilian English, tá? The thing is, you can hear the Brazilian accent from across the room. It's a melody that you have to identify, eh? Mas é... Em Brasil? Ah, tá bom, pode ser. We can stop there. That's good. The main sources, question here, what are your main sources of nothing sentences, and do you try to memorize them? The main sources, a great question. The main sources of the nothing sentences are the questions that you get asked all the time. right? They're going to get asked, how do you speak German? How did that come about? What's your story? They're going to ask you those basic things about your life and job. And if you can have a canned answer about what you do, but it's those filler phrases that will get you into it. Oh my gosh, that's so funny. I don't know why that comes out. It's so funny. You asked me that. 2 people asked me that today. That's so funny. But they're not always memorized, but what I do memorize is a guide phrase in all the languages that I speak. So it's nice to have like one sentence where someone's like, oh, you speak Japanese? Well, say something in Japanese. And I'm like, 俺は日本語あまり喋れないけど勉強してる途中だよ. And they're like, oh, all right. And so I'm like, you just need one sentence to be like, oh, it sounds all right. But saying 1 or 2 words, and ohayo gozaimasu or arigato is not as impressive, apparently. But thank you for that. Oh, this is fun. Are there any volunteers from the audience who are willing to show us some nothing or speak in another language? That's a good question. That's not for me, I guess. Would anyone want to try to attempt a nothing sentence in a language that they speak? Yeah. You want to try? Yeah, please. I'll come down. This is interactive. I can come to you. All right, nothing sentences in which language?
In Swedish. So, du vet liksom, bara man gör så här, eller om man tänker på det så skulle man kunna göra det på det sättet, eller så är det inte så. Och ja, ungefär så.
Amazing. Sounded like a lot of nothing. I enjoy it. Other nothing sentences? Yeah, more? Awesome, this is great. Hello, steppage in.
I'm going to try French. Non, en fait, c'est pas ça, en fait, ce que je voulais dire. En fait, si tu comprends... Non, en fait, c'est pas ça. Bref, en gros, ce que je voulais dire, c'était qu'en fait, si tu pars de l'idée que...
Love it, yes. Lots of nothing, lots of filler phrases, I hear it. Other nothing sentences? All right, we'll see if we can wrap this up with a couple questions. Can you overdo nothing sentences so that you won't sound natural? Probably. I mean, see, the thing is, I can hear the nothing as I introduce this. The thing is that people do overdo those as native speakers. It's annoying when you hear it too much. People usually call you out. You're the kind of person that says like too much. Maybe they don't, because they're polite, but you can overdo it in a sense, maybe as we were speaking before, where it doesn't really help the conversation. You don't want to just say sentences to show off you can speak the language. You do want to communicate an idea, and these are going to fill it in. So I think people can see through if you're actually not communicating much, and they either will just find someone else to talk to, or maybe politely excuse themselves. How do you drill these? Again, you could use flashcards. I would just probably practice, like everyone here who was volunteering to do so nicely, is just think about what you would say. What is the word for so? Like, what sounds do people make when they're thinking? Remember that these filler phrases and sounds are also expressing other emotions, not just I'm thinking of something, but oh my gosh. Like that type of delivery can express so much more than just the words themselves. Does it work if you use nothing sentences but don't really get the prosody pronunciation? It's a start. I would definitely use those words to match the native delivery anyway, and you work towards that accent, but it's important that you don't firm up and solidify those bad habits, right? Learn the basic phonemes and phonology of the language so that you're not making these egregious mistakes that don't communicate that sentence, right? If you actually lose communication, choose a new nothing sentence. What is the most interesting experience you've had from sounding like a native? Oh my gosh. I don't know if it's the most interesting, but every time I go, the first time that I went to the airport to go to Israel, you have to go through a passport control. El Al, it's super secure, and they always ask you in Hebrew, Ivrit ou Anglit? And usually, even though I speak Hebrew, the passport control, not trying to practice my Ivrit at that moment, right? So I'm like, Anglit, and I gave him like a half sentence in Hebrew, and she kind of looks at me and is like, you're messing with me? Actually, I mean, I have an American passport. I said Anglit with an Israeli accent, and people are just like, okay, Anglit, I give you Anglit. And then I'm like more suspicious to them, maybe, I don't know. But it was like, I'm being serious. I knew the word, I said it in Hebrew. No, But the reaction from that was like, okay, government officials recognize my Hebrew, and I'm okay with that. So, all right, do you also work on body language, gestures, or do you just stick to word pronunciation and the way language sounds? Yes, of course, body language and gestures, if the language calls for it, right? There's some languages where you keep your hands down, right? There's other languages where you really need to, you know, you can't have your hands in your pocket, and I think you know who you are. But it's important to see match the same system. Same idea here. Everything is relative to the language. If it's a content-based, you know, and dense language, really go for the content. Don't mess around. But there's some languages, like Portuguese, when someone has a birthday, you just want to write a whole page of a message to them and know that that's what they're going to do for you. Anyway, thank you so much for today, guys. I had a great time. Enjoy the rest of the conference.